On September 23, 1994, 8 years after the Chernobyl disaster, a group of 5 Ukrainian teenagers decided to go explore the abandoned theme park in Pripyat, Ukraine. When they got there, they encountered something that could not be explained, something deadly, leaving authorities and the families of those involved baffled for years. Nikola Koval, age 17, Yuri Kuzmenko, age 17, Fedor Mazur, age 18, Maxim Yurchenko, age 16, and Yakiv Kushner, age 16, were the teens who ventured into the park that day. There were 2 survivors, one with a unique ability that helped him and another make it out alive. They were able to recount the horrifying events that unfolded that day to the authorities in Proliski, the city the teens were from. This is a story as was told to the authorities several days later by one of the survivors. It's been translated from Ukrainian to English. Me and my friends had been talking about making the 3-hour drive to the abandoned theme park in Pripyat for a while, but hadn't had the guts to do it until last week. What I'm about to tell you happened last Friday, so about 3 days ago. We had to plan our trip out secretly and carefully because we needed to borrow Fedor's parents' car to make the long drive to the park. We told them a lie saying we were going on a fishing trip for a few days. If any of our parents knew we were going to Pripyat, they would have beaten us and stopped us from going. Now, I wish they had. I think we all knew it wasn't safe to go there, but the thrill and excitement of exploring the abandoned park outweighed our fear and common sense. I did try saving them all, but couldn't. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. We left early Friday morning, I'd say about 4 a.m. Our plan was to get there early enough so we could have more time exploring the park. As the park came into sight and we pulled into the parking lot, I remember being excited. But at the same time, in my mind, I was beginning to question what we were doing. When Fedor stopped the car, he said, "All right, boys, we're finally here. Let's go check this place out." None of us hesitated jumping out of the car. The long drive was starting to get to us, and we were anxious to stretch our legs. There was a fence surrounding the park, but someone had cut a hole we could easily fit through. As we made our way through the hole, we laughed and talked about what the park would have been like when it was open. As I passed through the fence, it felt like I'd stepped into a different world altogether. The smell in the air was odd. It smelled old and metallic, and like something was decaying. It wasn't a comforting smell. I could almost taste it and feel it on my teeth as I breathed in the air. I was going to say something about it, but for some reason I didn't, thinking maybe it was just me. Also, my friends were having a good time, so I didn't want to say something to bring their spirits down. As we stood there at the entrance, we could see it was run down. Everything was turning to rust. Nikola had continued walking and was in the lead by a bit, heading towards a small rundown building. The windows were all broken out, and there were rust stains running down the white paint that covered the building. As Nikola was about to step inside the building, I was hit with what I call the dark ability. I immediately froze in place and shouted, "Nikola, don't go in there." He immediately stopped dead in his tracks, looked back at me and asked, "Why? What are you talking about? This is why we're here." The rest of the boys were looking at me and laughing when all of a sudden we heard Nikola scream out in horror, "Help me!" His screams were then instantly cut off, then silence. "What the hell?" Fedor shouted as we all looked towards the white building. We quickly ran over and could see the door Nikola had gone through. We stood there staring at the door, hesitant to walk in. Fedor was the first one to step inside. He was more or less the leader of our group, being he was the oldest. The rest of us followed him inside. They were expecting to see Nikola in there, most likely playing a joke on us. Instead of Nikola being there, in the middle of the room was an old doll, lying down on an old decaying chair, wearing a gas mask on its face. The floor was completely covered with old gas masks. None of us said anything as we stared at the creepy-looking doll. "Where the hell is Nikola?" asked Yuri. Fedor then immediately asked, "Yakiv, why did you tell him not to go in here?" I stood there for a moment deciding whether or not I should tell them about my dark ability. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Even I had a hard time believing it sometimes, but I'd had it for years, so it'd become normal to me by now. Given the situation, I took a deep breath and decided to tell them. 5 years ago, I was exploring the basement of the abandoned mental hospital in our hometown when I stumbled upon an old, wooden rectangular box. When I opened it, I discovered a flat wooden board with a planchette. The flat board had letters and numbers on it, with the words yes and no on each side. Back then, I didn't know what it was, so I took it home with me. I hid it under my bed for a few weeks, fearing my parents would take it from me if they discovered it. Then late one night, I decided to pull it out and mess around with it. The planchette had glass in the middle of it, so I figured you moved it over the letters or words. As I was moving it around the board, I immediately felt something enter my room. I quickly stood up and started looking all around me, but I could see nothing. I then looked down and could see the planchette was moving by itself. It spelled out the word gift, then abruptly stopped. I quickly jumped on my bed, trembling with fear. I sat in the corner of my bed for hours, afraid to move. I'm not sure what time I fell asleep, but when I awoke, I was still sitting up in the fetal position. That morning I felt different. It's hard to explain what I felt, but there was definitely something different about me that wasn't there before. A week later, as I was walking down the street to the grocery store, I had a daymare. It was almost like a movie playing in my mind. It was of someone getting hit and killed by a car. Very quickly after that, I witnessed someone in front of me crossing the street, then getting hit and killed by a car. It happened exactly like what had just played in my mind. At first I was scared and confused. I wondered if it had really just happened or not. A few weeks later it happened again, and it's been going on like that over the years since that day. About 10 seconds before something bad is going to happen, I see it play out in my mind. I've never told anyone until now. Who would believe it, right? My friend stood there for a moment looking at me dumbfounded, not saying a word. "What was the board and planchette you found?" asked Maxim. "I believe it's called a Ouija board," I responded. "You're right, I don't believe you, but I still don't know why you yelled at Nicola to stop. He's got to be around here somewhere. We need to find him," responded Feder loudly. I could tell he was starting to get angry. Feder then started yelling, "Nicola, Nicola, where the hell are you, mate?" It was easy to see he was not inside the building. It had no other rooms and nowhere for him to hide. The rest of us were silent as he yelled out to him. Maybe he somehow got out of the building without us seeing him. Maybe he's playing a prank on us. "Let's go find him," said Feder. As Feder was walking out of the building, Yuri looked at me and asked, "What did you see happen to him?" "I saw him get taken into a shadow," I responded. Yuri said nothing as he stared at me. I could tell he believed me and was starting to get scared. We followed Feder as he slowly walked towards another section of the park, continuing to yell for Nicola to come out. As we continued walking, we kept getting deeper into the park, which seemed like a maze. Nobody spoke as we walked, except for Feder shouting. I could visibly see the rest of us were deep in thought and scared. Part of me, of course, wanted to find my good friend, but part of me wanted to get the hell out of there, and fast. As we came up to an old ride that was hard to make out what it had been, I was hit with another daymare. I yelled out to Feder, who was still in the lead, to stay out of the shadows. He looked back at me for a split second and kept walking and shouting. Soon, after the rest of us witnessed something that looked like an arm reaching out of the shadow, grabbing him by the throat, ripping it out, then slowly dragging him into the shadow. Then he was just gone. We shouted out Feder's name in horror as the three of us took off running. Yuri and I were together as we ran one direction, and Maxim, who had been closer to Feder, took off in the opposite direction. We had no idea where we were going, but I knew now we had to stay out of the shadows, which was going to be hard to do considering how the park was set up. As we ran, I yelled out to Yuri, "Whatever you do, stay out of the shadows." He didn't respond as we continued running. As we ran, I thought to myself, are we going deeper into the park or towards the entrance? I was hoping for the latter. As we turned a corner, we could see we'd come to a dead end and had no idea where we were. My thoughts turned to Maxim, wondering where he was, praying he'd be all right. I hadn't gotten another daymare from my dark ability, which was good. I was hoping he knew to stay out of the shadows. I wasn't confident he would, though. "Let's stop for a minute," I said to Yuri as I tried catching my breath. It was sunny that day with no clouds in sight, so it was easy to see where the shadows were. It was just a matter of not stepping into one or running into one that blocked our path. "What should we do?" asked Yuri. "We need to get out of here while staying out of the shadows," I responded. "What about Maxim?" asked Yuri. "Yes, we need to try finding him before we get out of here. We can't leave our brother behind," I responded. Yuri nodded his head in agreement as he tried catching his breath as well. After a few minutes, we both calmed our breathing and nerves down enough we could start planning what to do next. "I believe what you said about seeing into the future. What was that thing that grabbed Feder?" asked Yuri. "I don't know. I get brief glimpses into the future, but I can't explain yet what that thing was," I responded. "What's our plan then?" Yuri asked. "I don't know the way back to where Feder disappeared, and I don't know where Maxim ran, so we'll do our best to backtrack to see if we can find him. I'm not sure about you, but I don't want to be here after dark," I responded. "Yes, absolutely. I do not want to be here after dark either," Yuri replied. We then talked and decided which way we wanted to go to try finding Maxim so we could quickly get the hell out of there. As we made our way along the asphalt path, we were careful to avoid any shadows. I could see Yuri wasn't doing so well mentally. I mean, we'd just witnessed one of our best friends get savagely killed by something unexplainable, and another friend was missing, most likely meeting the same fate as Feder. I was able to process it better than him, I guess, because of the dark ability I possessed. We yelled out to Maxim as we picked our way along, but there was no response. There were multiple paths to choose from, with some of them being impassable due to the shadows blocking the way. Nothing seemed familiar either. I wasn't sure which way we'd come. We'd been walking for quite some time when we turned a corner, and suddenly I was hit with another daymare. Within seconds, we saw Maxim not too far away, with his back turned to us. He was slowly walking backwards and looked like he was lost. I yelled out to him to stay out of the shadows. Again, it was too late. Something reached out from the shadow, this time grabbing him by the spine, ripping it out, then slowly pulled him in. Then he was just gone. Yuri and I screamed out in horror as we watched our last brother get savagely killed by something unexplainable. We stood there for a while, frozen with shock as tears streamed down our faces, realizing we'd never see our brothers again. I eventually looked over at Yuri and said we need to find our way out of here before dark. He simply nodded his head in agreement. It took us several hours to make it to the entrance, but we eventually made it out safely. We then walked for about a day before we found someone who picked us up and gave us a ride back to Proliski. As we walked, we talked a lot about what we were going to say when we got back home. We ultimately decided to just tell the truth, as crazy as it sounds. The authorities asked Yakiv what he thought the shadows were. His response was, "The shadows are the dead who died there 8 years ago. They live there now, needing to feed on the living." The authorities went to the park in search of the missing teens, but were never able to find anything related to the boys, other than the car they'd driven, proving they were at least at the park like they'd said. They did also find the old creepy doll in the rust-covered white building just like they described, sitting on a chair wearing a gas mask, the floor riddled with old gas masks. This also proved they went inside the park. A few days after talking to the authorities, Yakiv showed up unexpectedly at Yuri's house late one night to tell him something. What he told Yuri scared the hell out of him. Yuri told his parents the following day what he said. "Last night I pulled out the Ouija board from where I'd been hiding it all these years. I asked it some questions. Why did my friends die? What good is this ability if I can't save my own friends?" The response I got was terrifying. The board spelled out, "You kill friends." It then all came flooding into my mind. I realized it had initially been my idea to go to the park. Deep down, somehow, I knew what was there, lurking in the shadows. Along with this dark ability, it opened up a very dark side of me, an evil side. I purposely led them to their deaths. After saying that, Yakiv turned around and immediately left, leaving Yuri dumbfounded. The following day, Yakiv's parents called up Yuri asking if he'd seen him. Yakiv's parents said he'd left a note on his bed that read only, "I'm too dangerous." He'd run away from home, never to be seen again. They searched the house for the Ouija board he'd talked about, but were never able to find it. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.